Walker Arts Center in Minneapolis for a dialogue with Robert Redford. Tonight's program is titled Robert Redford, Independent Visionary. I will talk with Mr. Redford about his remarkable career as director, producer, actor, a social, political, and environmental activist, and as co-founder of the Sundance Institute, a leading advocate for independent cinema. I'm Amy Taubin, writer, film critic, and contributing editor to Art Forum, Sight and Sound, and Film Comment magazines. I'm also a member of the selection committee for the New York Film Festival, and I teach at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Now we will begin our dialogue with a truly independent visionary who has transformed the landscape of American cinema, Robert Redford. Well, as Cheryl said, this man needs no introduction.
But I'd like one anyway, if you don't
want one? You want one? Well, he's one of the major American film artists himself, but he has changed the shape of independent filmmaking in America through his founding of and continual work with the Sundance Institute. He's also a person who is an activist, a social activist, a political activist, and particularly an environmental activist. What was remarkable for me preparing for this is when I looked at the films that were shown in the Walker series, your films, the films in which you acted or directed or produced or all three. They both spoke to the moment in which they were made historically, and they seemed utterly of this moment now, so relevant that when one looked at them 2 weeks ago, as many of you did, or a week ago, they seemed relevant. And then after Tuesday, they seemed even more relevant and in a slightly different way. So is that enough of an introduction?
Pretty good. Thank you.
And I thought we actually shaped this script together a little bit about 2 weeks ago, and today we decided to stick with it, even though it's very tempting, and I'm sure a lot of you will want to ask questions about what has changed now. But for the moment, let's stick to the script, and let's start by looking at a clip from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, because I think that is the film that put Mr. Redford not only on the map, he had been on the map, but gave him the power and the clout to make his own films and also eventually to found Sundance.
Yeah. There's something out there that scares you, huh? But it's too late. You know, you should let yourself get killed a long time ago while you had the chance. So you may be the biggest thing ever hit this area, but you're still two-bit outlaws. I never met a soul more affable than you, but you're faster than the kid. But you're still nothing but two-bit outlaws on the dodge. It's over. Don't you get that? Your times is over, and you're gonna die bloody. And all you can do is choose where. I'm sorry, I'm getting mean in my old age. Come on, shut me up, Sundance.
Has it been a while since you saw that?
A long time, yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of things to talk about in relation to this film. One is the outlaw and this particular depiction of the outlaw and how this film was made at the time of the Vietnam War, and what that depiction of the outlaw had to do with that for you.
Well, I'll tell you, the first thing that hit me when I was just looking at this is the role that the environment played in this film. I haven't seen the film for a long, almost from the time it first came out, but as I look at it now, I realize how much the environment played a role. It was really a character in the film because they had to ride through the Southwest. Mm-hmm. And you had to capture the feeling of what the Southwest was like. And I think George Roy Hill, who, by the way, I think deserves a lot of credit. I don't know that George ever received the credit that I think he fully deserves, because he went on to make The Sting. Mm-hmm. But this was his concept. And I met George in a bar in New York, and initially I had been approached to play Butch Cassidy because I'd been in a comedy in New York. And so the idea was, well, I should play Butch Cassidy. Also, there was a 13 or 14 year difference in Paul's and my age. And Paul had played characters like the Sundance Kid before. George knew Paul, and he knew that Paul was actually, as a person, much more like Butch Cassidy. He'd bite his fingernails and stuff like that. So he came to see me, and I said, well, yeah, I can play Butch Cassidy. I'd be honored to do that, but that's not the part that I can identify with. I feel much more connected to the other character because of the way I grew up and because of the way my life started out, and where being an outlaw was very appealing to me at one time, to a fault. So I felt like I could relate to him much more. And he got intrigued by that. And he said, oh, that's really interesting. So he then fought for me to play it. And the studio didn't want me in the film because I did not have the name that Paul had. So they felt it would be too much of an imbalance. And George fought for me for that. So when it came to be, the original title of the film was The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy. That was the initial title that Bill Goldman had. So they switched the title around for Paul, and it was fine with me because I loved the part. There's a lot more to say about it, but that'll come up maybe some other time.
Well, the thing that you said about looking at the landscape.
Oh, it was terrific to film there. You were at Zion National Park, Bryce, you were around all this incredible geologic formations. I mean, it's just incredible.
But the thing that struck me when I looked at it was that a series of shots of you looking out, ostensibly for who is following you, but there's a point at which you get mesmerized by the landscape itself, and you look at it with such passion for that I thought that was really remarkable to see that, and for me that's what lives on in the film.
That's interesting. Well, what George did, another thing, he could build up anticipation. For example, he had a lot of shots of us stopping, because we had a hunch that we were being followed, but we weren't sure. And if we were going to be followed, it was going to be very, very tricky, very dangerous, which meant that we would have to constantly be moving to stay on the lam. So those first shots, we're looking out, and you pan, you don't see anything. You just see us looking, waiting. So that when he finally looks out and sees dots coming up, it had real meaning because you had built up to that moment.
Okay, so you're getting on to a subject that I really want to talk about, which is when you, every year pretty much, start off Sundance, or sometimes you introduce the awards night, and you always say that Sundance is for the filmmakers.
Yes.
Who are the filmmakers? We grow up with the notion of the auteur theory and that the director is the filmmaker. But I think when you say that, you are embracing other parts of what goes into putting this together. Not, the director isn't the only person who's the filmmaker. Could
He's
you
not.
talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, a director is not the only person involved. It's a collaborative effort, and it takes a lot of parts to make a whole. and the director guides. The director may have, in a particular case, may have the concept and take the concept forward, and then he has to put together a crew, but the crew makes it work. Otherwise, if it was just a director alone, it'd just be a director and nothing else but the movie. And I think there are a couple of examples of that. But mostly, it's a collaborative effort, and I always felt that, I felt the same way about filmmakers, that the reason I started Sundance was because I felt that the mainstream was completely controlling exhibition. And therefore, because they were, the mainstream was tied, studios' relationship with the theaters, and the studios had people under contract, so they put them in the films. And I just felt there were a whole lot of other people out there who were talented, who had stories to be told, and then they should be given a chance. So that's what led to the idea of starting Sundance. But then what was missing was these filmmakers had talent, they had skill, they had stories to tell, but they were undisciplined because they had not had a chance to develop themselves. So that's what led to the idea of starting the Sundance Institute. And the only place to start it was the only thing I could give up, which was the land in Utah. I couldn't put it in an urban environment. It would have been too expensive. So I thought I could give my own land and bring people out there. And I thought, well, maybe what would happen if artists came into nature, you know, because most of the film development was done in the cities. I said, well, what would happen if we had a development program in nature and see what kind of effect that nature would have on the filmmakers? But the bottom line point was to give new filmmakers a chance to have their stories told and be seen. So we started this nonprofit, the Sundance Institute, and we brought filmmakers out, and I would call on my own colleagues, directors, writers, actors, to come to Sundance and give of their time and work as mentors to develop the skills. So we did that, and we could see that we were helping them get their films made. But because we were a nonprofit, we couldn't follow them all the way into the profit zone. So they died at that point. And I thought, God, you know what's missing is that no one can see these films. So the only thing I could think of was, well, if we can create a place for the films to be seen, and at least create a community of the filmmakers to come see each other's work, then maybe that could start something. So that's what led to the idea of the festival in Park City, which is not Sundance. It's 40 miles away. So that's what led to the festival. But then later on, once that succeeded, a lot of people got confused. They thought that Sundance was the festival. All it was going into the profit area and saying, okay, we now want to have an exhibition place where people can come see the films. And that's how the whole thing started.
Do you think that the filmmakers who now go to put their work through the labs, there's a producer's lab, there's a director's lab, there's a writer's lab, and now there are new media labs, do you think the films they're making are significantly different than the films that were being made at the beginning in the early and mid 80s?
Yeah, I think so. I think the films are of their time. I mean, I think that, as you said, the Vietnam War, whatever the strong influences were of the time, usually you saw films following that, and they would make films about that. And that changed. And then we would see all kinds of issues that came up, women's films, LGBT films, all kinds of different categories were suddenly being represented by films being made by people in those categories. So I felt that was a pretty healthy thing because it would expand, it would broaden the landscape of film. And for a while we suffered because I think I was considered an insurgent, and like somebody in the mountains ready to come down and attack the film industry, And it was never meant to be that. It was meant to broaden the category and say, look, it's not just studio films. There are other films to be seen out there, other stories to be told in different ways. And also, those films, well, this is a different story.
No.
Well, when I was a kid, I grew up with only major studio films, and it was great as a kid. But there was all kinds of films. When I was a child going to a local theater in Los Angeles, you didn't see one film with 6 trailers blasting your ears off. You saw 2 films. You saw Pete Smith's short. You saw cartoons. You saw Serial. You saw Pathé News of the war going on at the front. that's what you got for an evening. And I suddenly realized when I was having to screen the earlier films that I did that had gone away. I thought, we really should bring that back, a whole menu of filmmaking. And that's what finally led to Sundance, to try to revive that. Are you bored?
No, I'm thinking.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know if you were- I wouldn't be surprised if you would.
Oh yeah, I've heard it all before. Let's look at two more clips. We're going to look at two clips back to back because these are films that seem, at least to me, strongly related. All the President's Men and The Candidate.
What's the topic for tonight?
Rat fucking.
In my day, it was simply known as the double cross. In our present context, it means infiltration of the Democrats.
Segretti won't go on the record. But if he would, we know he would implicate Chapin.
That would put you inside the White House.
Who? Can you be specific? How high up?
You'll have to find that out for yourself. I don't like newspapers. I don't care for inexactitude and shallowness.
That creep slush fund that financed the rat fucking. We've just about got that nailed down. I don't know how.
Did you change cabs?
Yeah. Does the FBI know what we know? It does justice? Why haven't they done anything?
If it didn't deal directly with the break-in, they didn't pursue.
Who told them not to?
Don't you understand what you're on to?
Mitchell knew?
Of course, Mitchell knew. Do you think something this size just happens?
Haldeman had to know, too.
You get nothing from me about Alderman.
Segretti said that.
Don't concentrate on Segretti. You'll miss the overall.
The letter, the letter that destroyed the Muskie candidacy, the Canuck letter. Did that come from inside the White House?
You're missing the overall.
But what overall?
They were frightened of Muskie, and look who got destroyed. They wanted to run against McGovern. Look who they're running against. They bugged. They followed people. False press leaks, fake letters. They canceled Democratic campaign rallies. They investigated Democratic private lives. They planted spies, stole documents, and on and on. Now, don't tell me you think this is all the work of little Don Segretti.
The FBI and Justice know this.
Hello, Bud.
Hi.
Bill, this is Floyd J. Starkey. He has to leave in a few minutes because 100,000 Teamsters in this state are waiting to hear what he has to say.
Is there any cream?
Here.
Thanks.
Bud, this is a man who can do you a lot of good.
Oh, yeah?
And you can probably do us some good if you get to Washington.
You didn't do much good trying to break up the farm workers.
Oh, yeah? That isn't how I'd put it. Well, there's no point in us chewing over our differences. When we get right down to it, you might find we have a lot in common.
I don't think we have shit in common.
And now, the man you've all been waiting for. Our next senator from this great state of California, Bill McCain.
I just happened to be in the neighborhood. Seriously, it's nice to be talking to an audience of working people because I can congratulate you on having jobs. You do have jobs, don't you? How many are out of work? Well, the unemployment figure for this state is 8%. Think of it. The biggest, the richest, the most powerful country cannot keep its full job force working. It cannot tend all its sick people. It cannot feed all its hungry people or decently house its poor people. It cannot educate everyone who needs an education. I say there has got to be a better way.
I think maybe some people are not that familiar with the candidate, so maybe I should just very quickly say that this central character is a political organizer. In his community, his father was a very famous politician in the state, and he gets drawn into running for office, at first reluctantly and thinking that maybe he can put his beliefs and his work into a larger frame, and then gradually he gets swept up in the power of it and in the adulation, and he begins to spout cliches, and he changes. I think it is really one of the most remarkable films.
There's a lot to say about it, but the idea of how politics can shift integrity. You can start off with a belief of a certain kind, and you think you can take that into the political arena and change things, but you can't. And the power inside, the powers that be, are so powerful. You don't know how powerful they are until you try to change them, and you find yourself not only not changing them, but ending up just like them. And I think the reason I wanted to make this film, it was original, and well, first let me talk about the two directors you've shown, because I think they are really special people in my life, that I had the joy and the chance to work with both of them. Neither are with us anymore, but Alan Pakula, when we were doing All the President's Men, I'll make this story quick. I had just finished The Candidate, which you saw. I just finished that film, and it was the year of the 18-year-old vote, and we were trying to use the film to promote the 18-year-old vote. And I was on a whistle-stop train ride. In the old days, going all the way back to La Follette, the candidates would get on the back of a train, and the train would stop, and the candidate would get out in the back and draw a lot of people and give a speech, and then the train would pull off. So we decided to duplicate that, and I was going to play a character that was totally unqualified. But because I was more charismatic, I would draw more people. So the idea was, if I, Bob Redford, could get on this train, and we would go out and see if I, Bob Redford, could draw people, see if we could outdraw Muskie, McGovern, all those guys that were actually running. And I thought, well, that was a hot idea. I thought, oh, this is really going to be fun. And so we had on the train, we had entertainment press, and we had political press, just to watch what was happening. So I would get out on the back, and I would say, and they would hand out flyers, Bill McKay, Bill McKay, and we would see how many people would come, sometimes be 2,000 or 3,000. And then I had the statistics, and I would say Muskie drew 400, McGovern drew 700, Scoop Jackson drew 50 people, you know. And so I would say, it looks to me like there are thousands out here today. I just want to thank you, and I want to let you, I have absolutely nothing to say, and I do that in the training club. So we thought that was a pretty hot idea to promote the film, until I started to feel like shit. You know, the train would pull out, and I'd see the look on people's faces, and I said, you know, this is not feeling so hot. So I went inside, and while I was making a fool out of myself on the back, the entertainment people were mostly drinking and falling asleep, and the political people were drinking and gossiping. And they had lost interest in me already, and they were talking about what had just happened at the Watergate and Larry O'Brien's headquarters for the DNC. And so they were talking about what went on there, because there had been this break-in and then just died away. What happened? Nobody really knew. So I said, hey, you guys, what are you talking about that break-in, right? And they said, yeah. This was about 2 weeks after the break-in, is early January 1972. And they said, yeah, we are. And I said, well, so what happened? They said, oh, don't even bother asking. I said, what do you mean? And they said, it's never going to come out. I said, what's never going to come out? And they said, what happened? I said, what do you, and so anyway, it was leading to the point that it had something to do with Nixon. And finally they said, look, you just don't understand how it works. This is never going to come out. There is a story here, but it's never going to come out, because nobody wants to be on the wrong side of this guy, because he's got a switchblade mentality, and he's vindictive. He'll punish the paper, and nobody wants to go there. Also, it's the summer of 1972, and more people can be interested in whether Hank Aaron breaks Babe Ruth's record. And nobody pays attention to politics. So I got pretty upset about that, and I got off the train. I didn't even I didn't finish it off. I was kind of depressed, and they said, it's never going to come out. So I went home. I read the paper just to see if this was true. Sure enough, for about a week and a half, there was nothing. And then finally, I saw this little blurb with a dual byline, just a little teeny thing saying something. And then a few days later, another blurb kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and always had the same two names. I didn't pay attention to what the names were. I just remember there was always two names. And finally, the thing built up through the summer, and it blew sky high in September. Donald Segretti and the Dirty Crit. And the whole thing blew wide, and they said, who's been doing this? And I saw this little article about the profile of two guys. And I said, wow, that's interesting. I said, no, I'd love to know what that was like. And I thought in my head at that time, I said, wow, what a nice little black and white film that would be, with two unknown actors to play these guys and tell the story that nobody would know about, because it eventually led to Nixon resigning and so forth. Anyway, so that was the idea, and I thought, well, I'll call Woodward and I'll call Bernstein and see if I can meet with him. They never returned my call. And so time went on. I called a few times, and finally I thought, well, forget about it. And the guys were right. They said, nothing's ever going to come out of this. So the two guys that were trying just sort of went underground. And finally, I got a hold of Woodward. And I said, hey, it's Bob Redford. I want to know if I could talk to you. And he said, not a good time right now. He said, it's really not so. And I don't think it's right. You know, maybe not. So I thought, okay. And he kind of blew me off. He said it wasn't a really good time. So I went on. And then suddenly, and it looked like this whole thing had gone away, and then suddenly Judge Sirica gets a note from James McCord in jail. He said, I have to confess, we were hired by the committee to reelect. And suddenly the thing just blew back sky high, and I said, wait a minute. So I called Woodward, and I said, no, look, can I just come talk to you? He said, meet me at the MPA home in Washington. Saturday night, I was making The Sting in Chicago. Saturday was going to be okay, so I said, okay, so I'll go in. I said, where do I find you? He said, I'll find you. And I said, what do you look like? I'll find you. So I go to the MPA home, it's a bad movie playing there. And people are looking at me like, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I want to see this movie. Really? You know. And suddenly there's Woodward right in my face. He says, Bob Woodward. And I said, oh, well here's, and boom, he cuts me off. He's not here. He says, go to the Jefferson Hotel bar. You leave first. I'll meet you there in 45 minutes. So I did. Anyway, getting to the point here, we had that meeting, and I said, look, I just want to know what you guys did. And I'm interested in that story. He says, now's not a good time here. I have an apartment in New York at that time. They said, we'll find you. So they came up, he and Carl came up, and we spent 8 hours, and they told me the whole story, but it was still going on. They were still investigating, and they were going after Charles Colson. And I said, well, they said, look, we're going to write a book about this. And I said, well, I'm only interested in you guys, you know, whatever happens, history will take care of that, but I'm interested in what story nobody knows. So they talked to their editor, and the editor said, interesting idea, but I want to get as much money for you guys as I can. So you're going to write a book. Why don't we just say he has to wait until the book's finished?
We want to get as much
And we'll
money
give
as we
him the
could for the
movie rights.
Washington Post, too.
Right, and so I had to wait for 9 months for them to finish the book. Anyway, we finally got it going. And Pakula, I want to talk about Pakula. Gordon Willis did the photography, which was really terrific, because he knew how to work with dark, mostly dark and light. And he had a concept about when you were in the newsroom, it would be completely fluorescent lighting. There'd be no shadows. The moment you would leave, that's where the light was. That's where the effort to tell the truth was. Once you went out, you were in the darkness. So Washington was shown in the dark. So that scene is a combination of Gordon Willis and Alan Pakula really designing a scene that most people kind of knew about, but we wanted to make it frightening. And the way they constructed the scene with Deep Throat was to make it frightening. And the whole idea of take this movie and start making it really, really frightening. That's how close we came to losing something important.
So you, for both of these movies, Wildwood was involved as a production company. Is that correct?
Yes.
So while you didn't direct them, you didn't actually write them.
I did work on The Candidate.
As a writer.
Yeah, because the reason for making The Candidate was what I could see in 1968, 9, 70, that suddenly we were electing people not by substance, but for cosmetics. And so I wanted to make a movie that showed you could succeed if you were just cosmetically attractive, as opposed to having substance. And that's why I felt that I felt that the first 3 films that I made that I could produce should end with a question. Downhill Racer ends with a question.
Same question, right?
Well, it's not verbalized, but it's the guy does everything to win. He realizes, what does he really want? What does he really want? And in The Candidate, I wanted the last line to be, what do we do now? From a character that got taken over by the system, and suddenly he was there, but he forgot how he got there, and forgot why he was there. And so Michael Ritchie was the director of that film, and Downhill Racer, and Pakula for All the President's Men. So I just felt very privileged to be able to work with those guys, because we really worked hard to develop the project.
The thing about The Candidate also The Candidate is fascinating because that's still the model, right? I mean, that model back there in 1970.
Well, it was meant to be a satire.
Yes, but, and it kind of is today. It also is, there's a layer in it that you can see in your performance. This is what happens to actors. You know, as it happens to politicians, but it also happens to actors when they begin to feel, you know, this huge crowd out there looking at them, and they begin to play the crowd and understanding how to play the crowd. That's why I love that scene where you have all those people looking at him and they absolutely adore him, and he's saying nothing whatsoever.
Right, but it's getting to him, yeah.
Yeah.
He's buying into it, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember years ago how good it felt and how different it was, because I had been in theater and early television, and suddenly something shifted after Butch Cassidy, and how I began to get noticed. And so I remember thinking, uh-oh, there's danger here, and I better watch out. I don't want to buy into this. I don't want to let this affect me. So I made 3 notes to myself. It all had to do with the word object. And I said, the first thing is you begin to be treated like an object, and it feels different and it feels good. And then if you're not careful, you'll begin to behave like an object. And if you're not careful with that, you become an object. So I put that up for myself to be careful. So I was doing pretty well, and then I'll just tell you this quick story, but where I learned about the value of humility. After Butch Cassidy, I was starting to get recognized, and it really felt good. And pretty soon along the road, I began to think, hey, maybe I am kind of a big deal, Maybe I am somebody, And it started to get to my head. I was getting ready to cross the street in Wilshire Boulevard, and I was about to step off the curb, and this car came as the light was changing, and it was full of a lot of teenagers in the car. And they saw me, and they were going like this, and I thought, oh, these are fans, and they rolled down the window as they were coming by, and they said, Robert Redford! And I said, hey, they said, you're such an asshole! And I said, okay, I guess that's it, from that point on.
But the other thing that I want to say...
Is this going viral, by the way?
It will eventually. They'll put it up on the web, and they do that,
Okay.
So it's not just for 350 people, no. The thing about these 2 films that interests me so much, today I know this is the experience we have a lot when we go into movies. The first thing that comes on the screen is, this is based on a true story, or this is close to a true story. And these true stories that we see now, they're usually focused on a person's life. And that person's life could be at any time, almost at any place. The thing about these films, all the films you've been involved with, is they have such a sense of the underlying political and social structure that forms these people, that makes this conflict, that makes these things happen. So when I asked you about your developing them, the films, being involved in the development through Wildwood, could you talk a little bit about your sense of structuring films so that they're more than an individual, more than, do you understand?
Well, I do. I understand that. When I was growing up, my memory begins with the end of the Second World War. And I grew up in a very lower working class community where everybody had jobs. My dad was a milkman, next door neighbor had a garage, and that's the way it was. But everyone got along. Everyone really got along, and because they were all united in the war effort. So I grew up with a lot of propaganda as a kid, and there was a lot of red, white, and blue going on, and I bought into it. And then, as time went on, and I grew up, and I started to become an artist, and I went out in the world and experienced life outside of Los Angeles, I realized that it was far more complicated than the propaganda during the Second World War. And there was a big gray area out there where life was much more complicated. And so I decided to go into that. I was really fascinated by that territory because there was a new kind of truth from the one that I grew up on. And then eventually I realized, I think when I was an artist and I was going to be able to make film, I said, I think I'd like to make films that are about that gray zone, which eventually led to the reason, one of the reasons for starting Sundance was to give opportunities for other people that also felt compelled to go into that gray zone that didn't get a lot of attention, because the mainstream was promoting films that were more propagandic. And so that's how I got attracted to the area in between.
And the characters that you play, although we come away from the films and think, oh yeah, he's this golden boy. And then every time you go to see one of your films, there is the bit of the golden boy, but underneath it, it is so complicated and such a kind of war within every character that you play.
Yes, that's true.
And I guess I was going to talk about this, or we will maybe going to talk about this a little later, but I want to talk to you a little bit about acting, which I hear you're about to give up. That's sad. Understandable, but sad. And how you know, you're probably the only American actor who's made a major film that goes on for 2 hours in which you say a little, we'll see it later, All Is Lost, in which you give a little speech and voiceover at the beginning, and then you don't say a word for the entire 2 hours, except at some point you say, fuck this, or whatever. How do you do that? I mean, how do you go inside yourself and still let people know what's going on in there? You're not opaque as an actor. We know what's going on in there at every second.
I didn't start out to be an actor, and it took me a while to accept that I was an actor. And it had a lot to do with the way I grew up. I grew up in a kind of a rough neighborhood, and we would go to a matinee or something like that, and we would make fun of the screen. And we thought that was kind of cool, you know. If there was a love scene, we'd go, oh, you tell him, lover, you know, stuff like that. And so the idea that I would eventually be one of those characters was just impossible for me to imagine. So I was very self-conscious in the beginning about being an actor. It was very hard for me to accept the fact that I would be an actor. And yet, what happened was that I wanted to be an artist, and I was painting, and I came back to New York from Europe, and serendipity, a couple of weird turns, I ended up in a dramatic school. And I wasn't intending to go there, and I wasn't going to stay there, but the head of the school saw me do an audition. They told me I should stay, and that I should stay in that world. And it took me a really long time to accept that that would be the case. And then what happened, I started a career and things started to happen, and I was in television and the last live television show on Playhouse 90. And the impact, I just wasn't prepared for. What it did to me on a deep way. And I realized that this was something that I should take seriously, and that craft was very, very important. You had to really learn what the craft was, but you then had to let it go. So for me, it was all about thinking that to inhabit a character, you had to be in that character's skin. You had to think the way the character would be, and you had to act the way the character was. Even though it might not be somebody like yourself, the challenge and the excitement was stepping into another role, another character, and being totally believable. That was exciting. And that's finally when acting hit a nerve with me that made it finally comfortable.
I mean, maybe this is something that I shouldn't ask you, and you can't speak to it because it's your craft. There are actors who disappear into their characters, they're character actors, and they're different, and you never have a sense that, oh yeah, I know when this person comes on the screen who he is. But you are always recognizably Robert Redford, and you are a different character each time. And that's what's remarkable about that. That you don't, as who you are sitting here, that doesn't disappear.
Wow. Well, you're onto something I'm not on. I mean, that's interesting. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe maybe we'll try another clip, and we'll try it from a totally different kind of subject matter. But these are two films that I thought a little bit maybe I should frame this discussion with. One is Jeremiah Johnson, and the other is All Is Lost. And they seem to me to be.
Set up for quiz show.
Oh, I'm sorry. We skipped quiz show, and quiz show is relevant to the two films we just saw. So I'm going back. I'm very sorry. Let's do quiz show, and let's do quiz show now.
Dorothy, your tomato salad is fabulous. What's your secret? Manure.
Now look at Thomas. Thomas is aerodynamically designed to go directly to heaven.
And who are you?
Yeah, good one. Friend of Charlie's.
Ah, you sound like you're from Boston.
Brookline, actually.
You know what?
Oh, yes, you did. We have the horseradish growing in the garden.
Well, that's true.
20 years.
Auntie Rita had an affair with Wendell Wilkie.
Now see summer bloom upon this lea, 80 rings around this tree. Once green, now bare, once lush, now sere, consoled only that I am planted here.
You certainly are.
Roots thick
And old.
and deep
And doddering.
assuage my woes.
Termite nibbles at my toe.
Head too funny.
Charlie, is Jack Barry single?
I think so.
Well, my roommate has a huge crush on him. She wants you to introduce her. What's Dave Garroway like?
Cheap.
Cheat?
Wasn't I talking?
You were, yes, talking and talking and talking.
Charlie's famous, like Elvis Presley.
I'm like Leopold of Belgium, usurped by his son before his time.
I suppose that makes me King Baudouin.
No. Next birthday, we'll all get a dirty limerick.
I certainly hope so.
So how's it feel, Charlie?
Well, I can't even eat dinner in a restaurant anymore. And people follow me inside to discover what kind of brain food I eat.
In my day, it was flagpole sitting and swallowing goldfish.
Last week alone, I had 11 proposals of marriage.
Perhaps you should accept one of them.
To think that they unleash you on those impressionable young minds.
Well, why not? He's 33 years old. Jesus Christ had a girlfriend at 33 years old.
Look how that turned out.
And he shared an office with his father.
I'm sure they're all very nice girls.
In that case, perhaps I should appear on a quiz show.
Well, the money, meanwhile, no one knows what to do with it. Though every stockbroker in New York seems eager to try.
Why don't you just put it in the bank? What I've always done with my prize money.
No, it's just, you don't understand that. There are all sorts of tax implications.
I think I can understand the concept of taxes.
At this level, it's a bit more complicated.
And at my level, never thought of myself having a level, Charlie. What level might that be?
I mean, it's not as if the money fell into my lap. I worked for it.
Work? Oh.
Millions of people watch the game shows, Dad.
Then I suppose we've become a nation of proctors.
Mark.
Help me out here, Harvard.
Claim victory and depart the field.
Of course, we don't have a television.
Why on earth would we need a television?
How much money is it again?
What?
What? They don't have a television. You haven't seen the show?
We were supposed to watch it the other night at Thurber's.
Even Thurber has a television, and he's blind.
What? How much is it now, Charlie?
$122,000.
What? Oh, she heard that all right.
Well. Some rise by sin, and some by virtue fall.
Measure for measure. To do a great right, do a little wrong.
Merchant of Venice.
It's this game our family plays.
Oh, what men dare do, what men may do, what men daily do, not knowing what they do.
Much ado about nothing. Things without remedy should be without regard. What's done is done.
Things without all remedy. Macbeth.
How ill white hairs become a fool and jester. Now, Professor, open your presents.
Well, what have we here?
Aftershave.
Oh, no. Oh, my God. Oh, well. I guess I'm surrounded. Thank you, Charlie.
I thought you might like it, Dad.
Yes, Quiz Show just gets better and better. It is one of the great American 20th century movies. And Mr. Redford directed this movie, and Ralph Fiennes plays the Robert Redford part. And
Paul Scofield
is remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man for All Seasons.
Yeah. I saw him in Peter Brook's King Lear.
Oh.
And it was one of the great things I ever saw in the theater.
I was so lucky to get him because he had retired
Mm-hmm.
and he had a problem with the USA politically. He was living on the Isle of Man, and I knew that the guy playing Charles Van Doren had to have a father that was very dignified and powerful and famous, academically famous. So I just wanted him, and I was told, don't even bother, don't even bother, he's retired and so forth. Anyway, I got a hold of him and I told him what it was about, and he was intrigued, and I sent him the script, and he said, I'll come out of retirement to do it. And I was blessed by him. And of course, Rafe, the only thing he had done was Schindler's List at that point. And I felt that there was something about him. What it was about him was something in his eyes that when you looked at him, he seemed to be a competent fellow, but in his eyes was some kind of fear and some insecurity, and I thought
something
that was
slippery.
that he would be susceptible to something, yeah. And so anyway, that's how. But the reason I wanted to do Quiz Show was that I'd been in a quiz show, and I felt that the way that whole thing was structured, it was all fake.
When were you in a quiz show?
Well, it was 1959, and I was in dramatic school in New York, and had no money. I don't say I was starving, but I had no money. And somebody came into the classroom and said, look, they're hiring for a quiz show. Maybe some of you guys in the class want to go down and see if you can compete to be a contestant or subject. And I ran down there because I needed money, and I got selected. And I said, so what do I do? And they said, oh, you don't have to do anything. I said, I don't have to do anything? I said, well, I got to do something. No, just take it easy, just relax. Anyway, the upshot was that I would be a subject along with two other guys, and they had 3 screens, silhouetted screens, and above each screen was a light and a letter, X, Y, Z. On the other side of the screen was a guy standing there, and then the contestants would argue about who was this guy's twin brother behind the screen. So I was one of the guys, and of course I knew I wasn't the twin brother, And I thought, well, I said, how much do I get? And you say, you get $25,000. I thought, oh, so I'll do it. Standing back there, and suddenly I realized there's something very wrong about this, something really wrong. I was getting really creeped out because I saw this guy running along the edge doing that to get the audience fired up and to, come on, start clapping, start laughing. And I saw him coax the audience to laugh and clap to create this kind of energy. And then Merv Griffin was the host, and he bounced. He liked to hop, So he hops out. Everybody cheers, and I'm back there feeling, this is really, really wrong. And why did I tell people to tune into this? And so finally they say, okay, what do you think about this guy? He said, well, he's too tall, he's too fat, he's too this, he's too that. And okay, let's find out who is this guy's twin brother. So my thing goes up. They went, boom, and everybody boos because I'm not the twin brother. So that was my first experience in show business, getting booed. I got booed for doing nothing but standing there. And so when later on, years later, that had such impact on me because I realized how fake everything was. And then at the same time, when I was starting out being an actor, we had the $64,000 question and what the other one that this was taken from. 21. And so as time went on, I said I would really like to someday make a film about what that's all about. The role that academe at one time, when you look at magazines, you would see academic people on the cover sometimes. And every now and then you'd see a celebrity, you'd see an actor. But most of the time you had doctors and scientists and so forth. Then suddenly entertainment began to grow and grow and grow, and pretty soon you were having more entertainers on the cover, and you weren't having the academic people anymore. And I could see that what was happening was that entertainment was growing, 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 and overtaking divisions between hard news and so forth. And I just wanted to make a statement about that.
Do you feel that the quiz shows, which you realized were fake, and certainly I realized were fake the second I looked at them, that they were being fed the answers, that the level of mendacity in the quiz show, that what we call reality TV, has developed out of that? In other words, that box that's revealed is the vehicle for more and more blurring,
Yes.
so that no one understands what's true and not true.
And the power of television.
Yeah.
It was so seductive.
Mhm.
That's why we had scenes where the whole family would sit in front of the TV. When that was going on, the streets were empty, you know.
Do you see, because you directed this film and you directed a film that we're not seeing a clip from, Ordinary People, was your first film as a director. Do you see a relationship between the families?
I think that's Judith Guest.
Do you see a relationship between the families in Ordinary People and the family in Here, and the level where, let's say, the disavowal of truth begins in the institution of the family? Because that's what both of those films are for me.
Well, I don't know if you can compare them or not. I can only tell you how they came about, and that was that after All the President's Men, I wanted to direct, and I just wanted to be able to control the whole experience. I had been a producer and actor and so forth, but I wanted to be able to design my own film about a subject that was really interesting to me. And so I just decided that what the qualifications were going to be, it had to be about feelings, and it had to be about what happens with feelings and those people that can't get in touch with their feelings, and what happens to anybody around them when they can't. It was behavior and feelings. They're connecting the two. So I read Judith's book, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I thought, this is it. This is really a terrific story about communities where the lawns are cut, communities where the most important thing is what status you're in socially, and who's left out, and what pain does it cause if people are so committed to being in that category, they will sometimes ignore other truths that hurt other people. So the idea of the son being, because the one brother's killed, and clearly that brother was the favorite son, and the resentment towards the surviving son is played out. And so that meant you had to have a character that was seen to be devoid of feeling. And that character was, all they were interested in was, were they at the top of the social ladder? Were they doing everything perfectly right? And I just said, I just really want to make this film. So that's what led to Ordinary People.
But yes, and the Van Doren family, I mean, I think it's so remarkable, that close-up of Schofield after Ralph Fiennes says $120,000, and he has him at that moment.
Yeah.
And you think the amount suddenly you can't help but be impressed.
Exactly.
And so what's going on between those two people and the son who can't possibly live up to what his father believes he should be, and that he's finally impressed his father, and he's impressed his father by lying. is
And you had to see the
extraordinary.
moment of seduction. You had to see when that moment occurred, because in the beginning he's following his father's path.
Mhm.
But there's a weakness in him that gets exposed once he's offered something to go on a quiz show, and how he can't resist it. He tries to, and but finally he can't. He has a weakness that gets exposed with this. I just was really attracted to that story.
Okay. So now, because time is running out, we'll see the final two clips, and they are Jeremiah Johnson and All Is Lost. We'll see them back to back, and I chose them because we get back to something you talked about early, which is the existential man directly in conflict and trying to live in this situation where the land or the sea is going to defeat him in the end.
Would you happen to know what month of the year it is?
No, I truly wouldn't. I'm sorry, Pilgrim.
March. Maybe April.
March, maybe. I don't believe April. Winter's a long time going, huh?
Huh.
Stays long this high. March, the green, muddy months down below. Some folks like it. Farmers, mostly. You have done well to keep so much hair when so many's after it. I hope you will fare well.
The way that you wander is the way that you choose. The day that you tarry is the day that you lose. Sunshine or thunder, a man will always wonder where the fair wind blows, where the fair wind blows.
July, 4:50 p.m. I'm sorry. I know that means little at this point, but I am. I tried. I think you would all agree that I tried. to be true, to be strong, to be kind, to love, to be right. But I wasn't. And I know you knew this in each of your ways. And I am sorry. All is lost here, except for soul and body. That is what's left of them. And a half-day's ration. It's inexcusable, really. I know that now. How it could have taken this long to admit that, I'm not sure, but it did. I fought till the end. I'm not sure what that is worth, but know that I did. I have always hoped for more for you all. I will miss you. I'm sorry.
He'll be back. So very quickly, these two films were made. Jeremiah Johnson was made in 1971. It was directed by Sidney Pollack, but again, it was a Wildwood project. This film was made 3 years ago, by a very young director, J.C. Chandor. He directed it. I think it's remarkable that Mr. Redford took a chance of giving himself to this project, that this guy had only directed one other film. This is clearly, you can see, technically so difficult to put together. It's really a big action film with one person who's not going to say another word for the whole rest of it, but will be on that boat fighting to stay alive for about an hour and 45 minutes. And Jeremiah Johnson is not totally alone. There is a narrative. He meets Will Guerra, who is the older guy who helps him. He marries, or he gets together with a Native American woman. He adopts a child. But in the end, it is Jeremiah Johnson again in conflict with wanting to leave all this and go and deal with the land and his self-sufficiency. In All Is Lost, this is forced on you. You thought you'd come out, and Our Man is the name of the character, and Our Man thought he'd come out, I guess, on his yacht and have a nice meditative space, and then this befalls him. So I wanted to talk just a bit, because we're nearly out of time, then we'll ask you all for questions. I wanted to talk just a little bit about your relationship to the environment, not only in these films, but I mean, that's where you've done an enormous amount of work and that.
Okay. I bet you wondered if I had left?
I told them you hadn't left. I
had so much coffee I couldn't sit anymore.
I reassured them that you were coming back.
I'm sorry, but anyway, Jeremiah Johnson and All Is Lost. The connection there was being in nature, land and sea. And the Jeremiah Johnson I have a lot of pride in, because that entire film was filmed on my property in Utah. And so that's the one thing I could contribute. And there's a long story about that film, which we don't have time to go into, except it was a passion of mine, and Sidney Pollack was a dear friend, and he and I had collaborated on many films, and I had convinced him to do this. And he originally wanted, well, I don't know, you being alone and there's no dialogue, and I said, well, I just think there's a story there, I just think we could do something with this, so we did. And the idea of a man being alone and in nature, and I think probably it did have something to do with what I've ended up with my life being, which I think it's all led to the combination of art and nature. And so I think I wanted to show that in film when you put art and nature together, and how was it really in those days, back in the 1860, 1840, when a person went out alone? What was it like to be alone out in the wilderness because you thought you could get something from it, and you could live by yourself, by your own means, and finally you found out you really, really couldn't. And in All Is Lost, the guy goes out, thinks he can sail the Indian Ocean, and he's got his own boat. It's not a big yacht, it's a boat that it's sort of handmade. And he's not expecting, Jeremiah Johnson didn't really know what he was getting into. And so the film is showing what he didn't know and how he had to deal with it. And some of it he was naive, some of it he was lucky, and so forth. And on the other film, a guy starts out and suddenly he hits trouble that he's somewhat prepared for, but finally not completely prepared for. And he has to, it's what happens when you go past the point you're prepared for something and you have to improvise to save your own life, and you have to think, you have to figure. In the meanwhile, your world is collapsing around you. And I think that tension was, I was attracted to that.
Okay. I think we're going to open it up for questions, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
My question is, with Ordinary People, how did it come to be that you cast Mary Tyler Moore, since we think of her as more comedic?
I think there's a perversity in me. I'm not sexually perverse, but I think I am attracted to a certain amount of perversity. And when I was thinking about that film and who to play the character, I remember I had a place in Malibu, California, on the beach, and we had always seen Mary Tyler Moore as this happy-go-lucky, upbeat, up vibe, wonderful, wonderful character that just was full of joy and innocence and so forth. And she had a place down the beach. And one day it was like winter, and I was sitting there just looking out at the ocean, and suddenly this woman walks by, and it's Mary Tyler Moore, and she sort of bundled up. And she looks just, what it looked like to me was that she was sad. I don't know that she was or she wasn't, but she was bundled up, and against the winter light, and there was no one else on the beach, and this lonely character walking along all by herself. Whether she was sad or not, I don't know, but the figure walking, I said, oh, that's Mary Tyler Moore. And at that moment, it seemed like a sad visual. And so anyway, when it came time to cast, I thought, well, this would be interesting, to take a character that appears to be this, based on and find another part of themselves. So I went to see her, and she was very excited that I would give her the chance to play this character. because she really wanted to grow and she wanted to expand, and she knew that she was being saddled with that other image. And I said, look, this is not a character that many women would want to play. There's a very dark side to this person. And particularly when they finally have to come unglued. She said, I'll do it. I said, well, it's going to be a tough ride. I'm glad you're willing. And she was just absolutely terrific.
Yes, hello. I noticed as I was watching a lot of your clips tonight that you had the good fortune to work with a lot of older actors who were they were established and at the end of their careers, and I'm wondering how they informed you in your work at that time, and then how you now at your stage, and how when you work with younger actors, maybe reflect back on what they brought to you and how you can reflect on to the younger people that you work with.
Well, I don't know that I can answer the whole question. I can tell you what I felt about the older actors, like Melvyn Douglas. Melvyn Douglas had been acting in film since the mid-1930s. And I think what it was about older actors is that they carried such weight with themselves. They carry such experience, so many years of living, and it was just in them, as actors and as human beings. And I just felt that was a wonderful quality to see. And I think that in the candidate, Melvyn Douglas had it, and it was wonderful working with him, because I just think he carried the weight of all those years of having success and so forth. And I'm playing a son that hasn't had that yet. And putting us together, you can see the effect he has on me, and that I can't live up to what he is. So you want to have an actor that sends that signal out.
My question is, what impact do you think from this recent election will have on the film industry? And by the way, if you did run, I would vote for you.
I think, what was the question again?
What impact would, will the election have an impact on what films get made, how the industry handles this?
Well,
blah, blah, blah.
there are almost three separate answers to that. But the first one is, I think films are always made of their time, and whatever the topic is, whether it's the Vietnam War or Watergate or whatever it is, there will be films made about events that are taking place in that time that have impact on society. And so I think whatever that is, I think now probably, I would just guess, you'll see films made about disillusionment, surprise, the shock of thinking you have things going this way, and suddenly they go that way, and there doesn't seem to be any good reason why. And so there's a surprise. And so I would imagine you might see some films coming up that deal with that, because several films usually do deal with issues of their time. On the other part, about would I do something?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it just depends. It really depends.
I think the third part was, will there be, I mean, at first everyone wants to make something about this. Will there be a lot more nervousness on the part of the money people, the studios?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Well, I think it's changed again. It used to be the studios controlled everything. They were the money, and you kind of had to please them, and it was very hard to go outside of that. I think that was one of the reasons why I wanted to start Sundance and have independent film, to support independent film, because I thought there were different ways to tell a story, and it can't be that one-dimensional. There's going to be different ways. I think that'll continue. The question is distribution. In those days, there was very little distribution outside of a theater chain. But now with online and with the media changing and so forth, and television, how it's grown and so forth, a lot of the talent that used to be restricted to just major films is now moving into television because it pays well. And there's more variety and there's more options. So you have Amazon and you have Netflix and you got Hulu, you got all these other distribution sources that give more opportunities for filmmakers to have different places to go. So I would imagine that's going to continue for a while. In terms of the current events, there will always be films made about what is happening at this moment. I suspect we'll see that here.
You've also worked with some of the up-and-coming artists and filmmakers. What advice would you give to screenwriters and filmmakers that are maybe like in Minneapolis here that are trying to make their way and get their film shown?
Well, by the way, this is, I'm really happy to be here, and for a whole lot of reasons, because I've had experiences here over the years. It's been a wonderful place to be. Also, from a literary standpoint, you've got F. Scott Fitzgerald. Film standpoint, you've got the Coen brothers, you've got George Roy Hill. So there's a lot to be proud of here, and it's a great place to be. To me, it's all about story. It's all about story, and sometimes I feel that story has been lost in favor of special effects. And you'll see somebody that's really a dazzling filmmaker, they can just dazzle you, you know, with the special effects and explosions and this and that and the other thing. But you come away from it and it's like cotton candy. You say, well, where was the story? To me, it's all about story. Then it goes into 3 steps for me to be interested in something. What's the story? It's like there was evidence in the Deep Throat scene. What Deep Throat kept saying trying to say to Woodward, find the story. And so I think story is essential. Second step is, who are the characters that embody the story? And the third and most important is, where's the emotion? So it has to have those 3 steps. What's the story? What are the characters that embody the story? And then where's the emotion? If it doesn't have all 3, then I probably would not be attracted to it.
Can I ask a question? What do you mean by emotion? The emotions of the characters in the story, the emotion that's going to be, that the audience will feel?
Mm-hmm.
At what point do you start
Both.
thinking about the
Both.
audience?
The emotions of the characters hopefully would be so pronounced that the audience will feel that. Yeah, that's the hope.
Bob, got a question over here. One, I wanted to thank you for influencing my decision to be a journalist with All the President's Men. But I really wanted to know about your relationship, or if you can tell us about your relationship with Paul Newman, and whether you two ever came close to re-teaming on screen.
Well, Paul and I became very, very dear friends. And it started on Butch Cassidy. He had, for the fact that he would play with me, that he would do the film with me, was how it started. He was a very, very generous man. And he was a pleasure to work with because he was about craft. And so the fact that he would take a chance on me, not as well known, that's how it started. And then as we worked together, I realized that he was so serious about his work. And so was I, and that the work we did together was really about the professional part of it and the obligation to be professional about it. That drew us even closer together. And then it just turns out that we became just friends, just really good friends. And so from that point on, we decided, well, that was sure fun. So let's do something else together. So The Sting came along, the same director. And the interesting thing, by the way, about those 2 films is that if you look at them, in the first film, I play the more sedate, the more serious, the more dark, withdrawn, kind of heavier character, and Paul is this happy-go-lucky guy. And in The Sting, it's just reversed. He's this kind of cool guy, and I'm this happy-go-lucky guy. And it was just fun to have that reversal with somebody that was also a friend. And the other thing was, I'll make this real quick. I had a racing car, because when I was younger, there was a short period of time where I raced. But I had to give it up, and so, but I had this car, and there was only 100 of them that were made in 50 US and 50 Europe. I happened to get a hold of one, and it was really, really fast, and it was a 904 Porsche. We were making Butch Cassidy, and up to that point, Paul liked jalopy derbies. He liked hot rods and things like that. So I got him interested in this car, and then I said, you got to drive this. You got to drive this car. So he did, and he got totally taken with it. After the film was over, he went to Sacramento to a driving school, a racing school, and became a race car driver, and a really, really good one. The problem was he became a total bore talking about racing all the time. And so he would tell you, got this, I said, I know, I've been there. He said, yeah, but let me tell you, and he'd keep going. It was driving me crazy. So I decided on his 50th birthday, we both had a place in Connecticut. And so I went to a junkyard and I said, look, can you find a demolished car, particularly a Porsche if you can find one? And nothing happened. Finally, they called and they said, yeah, we have a complete, there was a pickup truck that fell over off of a railing and landed on this car. It's totally flat. I said, let me go see it. So I went to see it. It was really just completely flattened. So I said, okay, wrap this up in a wrapping paper with a ribbon, and I want you to take it to Paul Newman's house and leave it on his back porch. So they said, oh, wow, this is great. So I waited, and I called. I said, you guys do that? They said, yeah, we did. I said, okay, I didn't hear anything. And then one day I came home and came into the house, and in the foyer was this huge box. And it was really, really heavy, and it left a dent in the floor. And this was a house I was renting. So finally it took me about an hour plus to crowbar the thing open, and there was just this big block of metal. It was in a square. I said, oh. So then I take that to a friend who was a sculptor. And I say, okay, will you do me a favor? Can you take this block of metal and turn it into a sculpture that could be put into a garden? And she wasn't very good. And so she said, oh, that'd be great. So she was finished with it, and it was pretty unattractive. And so I told the same moving guys, I said, now take this and put it in Newman's garden. So these guys think they really have a good deal going, you know. So they said, wow. So I called, I said, so did you do that? They said, yeah. I said, you left it in the garden? He said, yeah. I didn't hear anything. And to this day, neither of us ever spoke about it.
I was wondering if, let's say that the movies in your life kind of become chapters of your life, things
Yes.
like that. I was wondering if there's any movie that you've made or a film that you've made or directed or been involved with that's changed for you over time. That looking back, it just really wasn't the same. Looking back as it was at the time. And
Oh, wow. That's really a great question. I suspect yes. I think, you know, I was saying earlier, like The Candidate was made at that time to be a satire for, we're beginning to elect people because of the way they look rather than any kind of substance. Times have really changed, which puts that film in a different, almost a whole different category. You would never know that at the time. When you make these films of their time, you have no idea what's going to happen over time. So you get surprised sometimes. And like Jeremiah Johnson, you know, Jeremiah Johnson didn't get released for 4 years because the studio just felt no one's going to go see a film about a guy alone in the wilderness with a beard and traps and so forth. And we tried, Sidney Pollack and I tried like crazy to get them to release. They just, sorry, we don't see the future in this. And so it took 4 years with pushing and shoving, and they finally put it out. And it ended up doing quite well. But that's what you're up against. You never know what's going to happen, but you make a film of the time because you're passionate about the subject. But you'd have no idea where it's going to go. And sometimes for me, it surprised me. Something that I didn't pay a lot of attention to, went on to do something. Other things that I really was passionate about and felt strong about, it didn't go anywhere. So you never know. It's a gamble.
So I know you've done tons of work all along the board, so not just acting, writing, directing, environmental and whatnot. Do you have something that you've done that you're the most proud of on its impact on the world or on people or on you?
Well, I don't know. I guess the fact that I was able to, as an artist, develop a craft, and I had the pleasure and the joy of being able to do it, to be able to make films, to be able to make something. And the reward for me is not on the back end. It's not on the awards ceremony. I'm happy to get an award, I'm flattered, but that's not where it's at for me. It's about the making of something. To me, that's the joy of it. So you make something, and that's your reward. I mean, for me, I don't know if there's really much else. What happens after that is sort of not my business anymore. It belongs, you make something and you hope it's going to be seen by somebody, so you turn it over to the public, and it's up to them. And if you're rewarded, that's great. Sometimes you don't, but it no longer belongs to you. So I guess that's the way I feel about my own work, is that if I do it, it certainly belongs to me while I'm doing it, because it's part of me. and you let some part of you go, and then it no longer completely belongs to you anymore. So you have to accept that.
I think we only have time for one or two more, so there are many more people.
Oh, I'm so nervous. I
So
have
am
loved
I.
you since I've been 10 years old. I had an 8x10 glossy of you on my wall from all through high school. Oh, so this is really great. But anyways, my question is, you're so into the environment, which I commend you. That's awesome. I believe in that too. And how we have someone that's going to go into the White House that doesn't believe in that. And isn't that frustrating to you? And what can we do to change people's mind? Why don't they get that there's so many problems with global warming and everything? I just, I can't understand how someone can think that's not happening.
Well, I think, look, it's always been that way. I mean, there's been ups and downs over the years. Things have gone pretty well for a while, and then suddenly you get a James Watt, or you get people like that. And so I suspect it may be that we've made a turn for the worse. But I just guess I believe that if you look at for me it all began when I realized that America was a developing country. That's what made us famous and strong, by developing. And so we're development oriented as a country, and you have to accept that. But then the question becomes, and the reason I became an environmentalist was that obviously I was very taken with nature and the role that nature played in our lives, and that we should keep it alive. We could learn from nature. And in terms of politics, or in terms of religious, or whatever it is, whatever you believe in, it is your business, but it came to me that whatever created nature was something I could believe in. Whatever the force was that created this phenomenal world, if left alone, could be quite amazing, but we weren't going to do that. We were going to develop, because we're a development-oriented society. So I thought, well, at some point, if there isn't some kind of preservation and keep a balance, we'll wake up one day and there'll be nothing left to develop. And we might be poisoned. And if we're interested in having a family, we're interested in bringing children into the world and hope that they'll bring more children into the world, then you have to give them something to work with. And that's what hit me hard. And so I thought, well, I'll just commit to that. Now, so I think for the future, my hope is, well, not to sound, I think women, I think that there's a real future, despite what just happened, I think there's a real future for the role of women in politics. And also I think young people, I really think that we have to turn something over to young people, but we ought to be careful that we give them something to work with. And that's where I felt we were in trouble, that we weren't really thinking about future generations and what we were going to do now to give them something to work with. So you had to be a balance, and it felt to me like we were so much about developing for profit short term that we might wake up one day and think we've got nothing left.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.